Sandra Okafor was 41 years old and had done the most responsible thing in the world. She had cooked chicken on Sunday night, a recipe for roasted chicken breast with garlic and herbs, enough for the week, the kind of meal prep that nutrition articles recommend, that saves time and money, that any nutritionist would say is exactly what a mother of 3 should be doing when she comes home tired from work on Wednesday. On Wednesday night, Sandra heated up the leftover chicken. It had been in the refrigerator for 3 days. It smelled good. The color was normal. The texture was normal. She heated it in the microwave for 2 minutes, just enough to warm it up. She served it to herself after the children had already eaten dinner. 4 hours later, she was in the bathroom with simultaneous diarrhea and vomiting. 8 hours later, her husband took her to the emergency room at UNC Medical Center in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, with blood pressure of 82/50, a heart rate of 128, a fever of 39.9 degrees Celsius, and mental confusion that she would later describe as knowing I was in the hospital but not being able to understand why I had gone. The diagnosis came 6 hours later, 12 hours after dinner on Wednesday. Gastrointestinal sepsis, bacteria, Listeria monocytogenes. Sandra stayed in the ICU for 11 days, on intravenous antibiotics for 23 days, with sequelae of mild cognitive impairment documented for 6 months, described by the neurologist as post-septic fog, which interfered with her work as an accountant for an entire semester. And before revealing what was growing in the chicken she had carefully prepared, stored correctly, smelled, and considered safe, and what this specific organism does inside the human body that makes it different from any other food poisoning you've ever heard of, you need to understand why the refrigerator that should have protected Sandra was the environment that allowed the predator to grow while she slept. The refrigerator is not a safe zone. That's the statement that will make you look at yesterday's leftovers differently after understanding the mechanism. Not because every refrigerator is dangerous, but because there is a specific organism that has evolved to do exactly what most foodborne pathogens can't do: grow at 4 degrees Celsius. The standard temperature of a well-calibrated American refrigerator is between 35 degrees Fahrenheit and 38 degrees Fahrenheit, between 1.7 degrees Celsius and 3.3 degrees Celsius. Cold enough to inhibit most bacteria, cold enough to slow spoilage, cold enough that most people consider any food without altered odor or appearance to be safe for 4 to 5 days. Listeria monocytogenes grows between 0 degrees Celsius and 45 degrees Celsius, with optimal activity between 30 degrees Celsius and 37 degrees Celsius, but with documented, measurable, and biologically relevant growth at 4 degrees Celsius. Every 18 hours at 4 degrees Celsius, a single Listeria cell divides and becomes 2. In 72 hours, 3 days, that single cell can become a colony of 16 cells. In protein-rich food like cooked chicken, where the cooking process has eliminated the competing microbiota that would normally inhibit the growth of pathogens, Listeria faces no competition. It grows alone, silently, without altering the smell, without altering the appearance, without producing any sign that the human instinct for assessing food safety can detect. Sandra's chicken smelled good because Listeria monocytogenes does not produce the volatile compounds that humans associate with spoilage. It had a normal color because Listeria does not discolor protein tissue. It had a normal texture because 3 days is not enough time for bacterial growth to macroscopically alter the structure of the chicken. But it was carrying a load of Listeria that, heated to a temperature insufficient to reach the internal boiling point of 74 degrees Celsius in all parts of the food, because microwaves don't heat uniformly, was ingested with viable bacteria still present in the cooler parts of the food. And what Listeria monocytogenes does inside a healthy adult human is what will make you rethink what you thought you knew about food safety. 2.5 million. This is the estimated number of annual cases of foodborne illness in the United States caused by Listeria monocytogenes, according to CDC modeling estimates published in 2011 by Scollin and colleagues. Most are not diagnosed as listeriosis. They are treated as viral gastroenteritis, as non-specific food poisoning, as that gut flu that lasted 3 days. In healthy adults who are not pregnant, immunosuppressed, or elderly, listeriosis often does not progress to the invasive phase that led Sandra to the ICU. But in immunologically borderline adults, stressed, sleep-deprived, with mild chronic inflammation that does not reach the level of a diagnosed disease, Listeria monocytogenes has an ability that distinguishes it from virtually all other foodborne pathogens. It crosses the intestinal barrier, enters the bloodstream, and crosses the blood-brain barrier. The same organism that starts as food poisoning can end up as encephalitis, meningitis, and sepsis in people who, by all conventional clinical criteria, were not at risk. Sandra was not pregnant. She was not undergoing chemotherapy. She had no immunosuppressive diagnosis. She was 41 years old, had 3 children, and a stressful job that had left her sleep irregular for 2 months before the episode. It wasn't enough to meet any of the criteria for a high-risk patient for invasive listeriosis. It was enough for Listeria monocytogenes to cross Sandra's intestine and enter her bloodstream. And before revealing how it crosses the barrier, and it's a mechanism that science took decades to understand because it's biologically terrifying in its elegance, there's a detail about reheating in the microwave that is the most disturbing part of this story. Because Sandra reheated it, she didn't eat the chicken cold, and yet she got sick. And the reason will change the way you reheat leftovers forever. The problem with the microwave isn't the temperature it reaches. Microwaves can heat the surface of food to temperatures that kill bacteria. The problem is how they distribute the heat. Microwaves heat by rotating water molecules within food. Heat is generated from the inside out in some areas and from the outside in others, depending on the food's geometry, its position within the oven, and the power used. The result is a heterogeneous heating pattern that produces hot and cold spots in the same food at the same time. A dish of chicken heated in the microwave for 2 minutes may have areas at 85 degrees Celsius next to areas at 45 degrees Celsius, a temperature that not only does not kill Listeria, but is close to its optimal growth temperature. Sandra had heated the chicken for 2 minutes. She had verified that it was warm to the touch. She had eaten it because it smelled good and was warm. The parts that were at 45 degrees Celsius delivered viable Listeria to her gut with the same efficiency as if the chicken had not been heated. The safety rule that Sandra didn't know, that most people don't know because it's not written on storage containers or in cookbooks or in the general food safety guidelines that people actually read, is that reheated leftovers need to reach an internal temperature of 74 degrees Celsius, 165 degrees Fahrenheit throughout, verified with a food thermometer, before they are considered safe for consumption. Not hot to the touch, no visible steam, not 2 minutes in the microwave, 74 degrees Celsius, 165 degrees Fahrenheit internal, verified. But the mechanism by which Listeria monocytogenes survived Sandra's reheating is just the beginning. What it did after it entered Sandra's gut is what will make you understand why this specific bacterium is classified by the CDC as the foodborne pathogen with the highest mortality rate per confirmed case in the United States. Listeria monocytogenes is not a passive bacterium. It is a bacterium that microbiology classifies as a facultative intracellular pathogen, meaning it has the ability to invade host cells, survive inside them, and use the host cell's machinery for its own propagation. The invasion mechanism is described by microbiologists as one of the masterpieces of pathogenic evolution. Listeria produces surface proteins, INLA and INBA, that bind to specific receptors on intestinal epithelial cells and endothelial cells. The binding induces the host cell to engulf the bacteria in a process called phagocytosis, the same process that macrophages use to destroy bacteria. But Listeria does not die inside the phagosome. It produces a protein called listeriolysine O, LLO, which punctures the phagosome membrane before it can fuse with digestive lysosomes. The bacteria escape into the cytoplasm of the host cell. Inside the cytoplasm, Listeria uses a protein called acta to recruit actin from the host, the structural protein that muscles use to contract, and build actin filaments behind it, propelling itself through the cytoplasm and into adjacent cells without ever needing to exit into the extracellular space where the immune system could detect it. In human terms, Listeria uses the structural tools of Sandra's body to move from cell to cell in the gut, eventually reaching the endothelial cells of blood vessels and crossing into the systemic circulation and potentially the central nervous system, without ever being exposed to the extracellular environment where antibodies and complement could neutralize it. It was this mechanism that Dr. Pascale Cossart of the Institut Pasteur in Paris dedicated decades to describing in her research, earning her the Griffith Prize in Microbiology in 2012. It is one of the most sophisticated immune evasion mechanisms documented in bacterial pathogens that cause foodborne illness. And it was inside the chicken that Sandra had carefully prepared on Sunday. In 2011, the CDC documented a listeriosis outbreak linked to contaminated cantaloupe produced on farms in Colorado that resulted in 33 deaths, the deadliest listeriosis outbreak documented in the United States since systematic tracking began. The investigation identified the same temperature failure in storage and processing that was present in Sandra's chicken, albeit on a smaller scale. Listeria growing at inadequate refrigeration temperatures, without visible signs, until it reached an infectious load. The CDC documents between 1,600 and 2,500 laboratory-confirmed cases of invasive listeriosis per year in the United States. The mortality rate per confirmed case is approximately 16% to 24%, the highest among all screened foodborne pathogens, higher than Salmonella, higher than E. coli 0157A7, higher than Campylobacter. But the fact that Sandra didn't know when she heated the chicken on Wednesday night is this. Listeria monocytogenes is the only clinically relevant foodborne pathogen documented in the United States that the FDA and CDC classify as capable of significant growth at standard domestic refrigeration temperatures. All other primary foodborne pathogens, Salmonella, E. coli, Campylobacter, Staphylococcus aureus, have strongly inhibited growth below 4 degrees Celsius to 8 degrees Celsius. Listeria does not. And the combination of 3 days of refrigerator storage, inadequate microwave reheating, and a bacterium that uses the host's cellular machinery to propagate undetected is what Sandra had served herself after her children had dinner that Wednesday. Sandra's instinct had been the correct instinct of a responsible and efficient mother. Preparing meals in advance reduces waste, saves time, and ensures adequate nutrition during a busy work week. The refrigerator kept the chicken at the correct temperature. She reheated it before eating. She did the sensory check that everyone does: smell, color, texture. The instinct to be responsible with family resources, not to waste cooked food, to use the weekly meal planning that all nutrition guides recommend. That instinct had created exactly the conditions in which Listeria monocytogenes thrives. Cooked animal protein, competing microbiota eliminated by the heat of cooking, insufficient refrigerator temperature to inhibit growth, 3 days of silent multiplication, and heterogeneous reheating that left viable cells in cold spots of the food. Responsibility had built the vehicle. The bacteria had used the vehicle. What the CDC, the Foodborne Outbreak Tracking System, and Sandra's 11 days in the UNC Medical Center ICU reveal about the pattern of listeriosis in non-pregnant and non-immunocompromised adults is that the risk is not restricted to the vulnerable groups that public listeria alerts always mention: pregnant women, the elderly, the immunocompromised. The bacteria are in food, in refrigerators, in 3-day leftovers from people who no risk criteria had identified as vulnerable. What Sandra never received was specific information about the only foodborne pathogen that grows at refrigerator temperature, about the 3 to 4 day window for protein leftovers, and about why microwaving is not a safe method of reheating without checking the internal temperature. This information exists in the USDA Food Safety and Inspection Service Guidelines. It's on the CDC website. It's in food safety publications that Sandra never had a reason to access, because no one ever told her there was a reason to access them. Sandra returned to work 3 months later, with monitored cognitive sequelae, with a food thermometer in the second drawer of the kitchen, which she bought the week she was discharged, and with the 3-day rule she now applies to any animal protein that goes beyond Tuesday to Friday. The thermometer cost $12. 11 days in the ICU cost more than that. The refrigerator doesn't protect against listeria. It never has. The difference between stored leftovers that are safe on the 4th day and leftovers that put someone in the ICU isn't the smell. It isn't the color. It isn't the texture. And it isn't the refrigerator being properly calibrated. It's the 3 to 4 day time frame for cooked animal proteins and checking the internal temperature of 74 degrees Celsius throughout the food when reheating, not sensory verification and not microwave time. If you store leftover cooked chicken, beef, fish, or eggs, discard them on the 4th day. Not the 5th, not the 6th. The 4th. Listeria monocytogenes grows in a standard household refrigerator. 3 days is the safety limit for cooked animal protein established by the USDA. There is no room for "it smelled good." If you reheat leftovers in the microwave, use a food thermometer. Check the internal temperature at least 3 different points on the food. The coldest point on the dish needs to reach 74 degrees Celsius. Not the hottest point, not the hottest point, not the part that released steam. The coldest point. This requires stirring the food mid-heating, redistributing the heat, and checking again. If you experience severe watery diarrhea, a fever above 38 degrees Celsius, and any mental confusion within 24 hours of consuming leftover animal protein, go to the emergency room and explicitly mention to the doctor that you ate leftovers that had been stored for more than a day. Invasive listeriosis progresses rapidly. The diagnosis of listeria-related gastrointestinal sepsis requires a blood culture, not just a stool culture period, to be confirmed, and treatment with intravenous ampicillin needs to begin before culture confirmation in severe presentations. Sandra entered the ICU 12 hours after dinner on Wednesday. The food thermometer she bought after being discharged costs $12 at any American supermarket. She keeps it in the second drawer. But Listeria monocytogenes is not the only foodborne pathogen that grows at refrigeration temperatures and is present in foods that seem completely safe. In the next video, Bacillus cereus, the bacterium that produces a heat-stable toxin in cooked rice stored at room temperature that is not destroyed by reheating, which causes acute emetic syndrome within hours, and which killed a Belgian university student in 2008 after eating pasta with sauce that had been in the refrigerator for 5 days. The toxin is odorless. The pasta smelled fine. Reheating didn't change anything.